Hello, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Trish Secca, and I'm a Senior Nutrition Program Manager here at IAFNS, the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to tell you a little bit about IAFNS. For those not familiar, IAFNS is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing food and nutrition science for public benefit. This is done by bringing together scientists from government, industry, and academia to identify areas of common interest and develop projects to advance science in those areas. As an organization, IAFNS funds research and convenes experts to deliver a variety of products to include competitively funded research, workshops, dialogues, and peer-reviewed publications. The webinar is brought to you through a joint collaboration of the Partnership for Public Health and the IAFNS Nutrition for Gut Health Committee. During the webinar, if you wish to ask questions, please click on the question button at the top of your GoToWebinar panel and enter your question in the box below. Questions are only visible to IAFNS staff, and we'll have time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the day, Dr. Robert Hutkins. Dr. Hutkins is the Kem Shahani Professor of Food Microbiology at the University of Nebraska. The Hutkins Lab studies bacteria important in human health and in fermented foods. His group is particularly interested in how probiotics and prebiotics influence the gut microbiota and gut barrier function and improves human health. The lab is also developing metagenome-based models that can be combined with AI and machine learning tools for personalized nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Hutkins.
Okay, is my screen there, and can everybody hear me?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, very good. So I'd like to start by thanking Trish for the introduction, thanking IAFNS for organizing this webinar, and thank you all for participating on a day where many of us probably didn't get much sleep last night. Quickly, my disclosures. I am a emeritus professor at the University of Nebraska, and I am also the Senior Science Advisor for Symbiotic Health, a startup company selling probiotics. Okay, so the team that I'm going to talk about today, whose results I'll talk about today, started about 5 years ago. It's a team of nutritionists, biostatisticians, epidemiologists, physicians, and 4 food microbiologists, and we address this question about the importance of live and safe, I want to emphasize safe, dietary microbes in the human diet. So I'll spend just a couple minutes on the rationale, what foods are good sources. I'll spend quite a bit of time on that, and then the evidence to support the hypothesis. And here is the hypothesis, that consumption of live, safe microbes in the diet can improve human health by engaging the immune system and reducing disease risks. So if we go back to the early human diet, and that could be even pre-agriculture, humans ate mostly raw foods that contain lots of microbes, not all of them safe, but it contributed high diversity to the gut, and that high diversity of microbes educated and inform the immune system, and in theory we had good immune health. Of course, tens of thousands of years ago we also had short life expectancy, so it wasn't all about high diversity of microbes. I want to make that point. Nonetheless, as society became more industrialized, those rich source of diverse microbes that were in our foods are no longer there, and that low diversity of microbes that reaches then the gut fails to educate and inform the immune system, leading to dysbiosis and perhaps poor immune health. So the hypothesis is that we can reintroduce that diverse collection of microbes through diet by exposure to safe microbes, mainly fermented foods, but others as well. and then again, engaging the immune system and educating the immune system to improve human health. So this was the hypothesis that we set several years ago. Okay. Now, before I go on to how to test the hypothesis, I want to make a major caveat, and that is that industrialization has plenty of upside. So prior to pasteurization, prior to canning, prior to heat treatment, prior to hygiene, foods, raw milk is a good example, contain very undesirable microbes, including Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Salmonella, Listeria, and all the other pathogens that we're familiar with. Um, Food processing, thermal processing in particular, made food safe with extended shelf life, year-round availability, and all the nutrients that are in those foods, fortification, I would even add there, contributed to the healthy to a healthy diet. Nonetheless, we've lost dietary microbes through processing. Okay, so how do we test the hypothesis? So again, the goal is to somehow associate microbes, live microbes in foods with health status. So there is a very good database called NHANES. You may be familiar with what we eat in America. That's the kind of the USDA component of that assesses what we eat, and NHANES informs is the dietary component that informs what we eat in America. It's a large cross-sectional survey, self-reported survey of adults and children for not only what they eat, but also for how they exercise and health status. I'll talk more about health status in a few minutes. The power of NHANES is in its large number of participants, more than 70,000. Again, it's based on self-reported dietary data based on 24-hour recall. It's done every 2 years. So it's sort of longitudinal in that respect. And again, the importance of NHANES is that it informs decision-making on the dietary recommendations that we all are familiar with, the MyPlate and so forth. But using NHANES data, we can correlate or associate food consumption to health status. So that's how it's been traditionally used. Okay. So now we're adding another whole component to not only the nutrients in all the foods in the NHANES database, but now we're going to add another metric, the live microbes in those foods. So if you go to NHANES database, there's more than 9,000 food codes for individual products. Not branded products, but just individual generic products. So what the team did, again, I mentioned there were 4 food microbiologists. We assessed each of those 9,388 foods for microbe content and assigned them either low, where they contained less than 10 to the 4th CFUs per gram, medium 10 to the 4th to 10 to the 7th, or high, greater than 10 to the 7th. We worked in teams. We accounted for any adjustments that we had to make. So it looked like a fairly daunting task. I should also point out we relied on primary literature, reviews, reference text, and so forth, and just expertise as food microbiologists to come up with these estimates. Okay, so it looked like a fairly daunting task. I was sorry that I stepped into this perhaps, but then when we actually looked at the foods in these and all the food codes, and again, this is a little bit hard to see, but if you look at, so this column has pizzas and things that we know are going to be cooked, pizzas and canned fruits and vegetables, pasteurized milk and dried milk. It was just easy to assign low, 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 on and on. Okay, so that was pretty easy, easier than we thought. We don't get into the medium category, 10 to the 4th to 10 to the 7th CFUs per gram, until we get to fresh fruits and vegetables. Okay, and so we assign those medium. And it's not until we get to the mainly fermented foods, so yogurts, I'm just showing you a snapshot of what these tables look like, sour creams, cheese, and so forth, that we get to the high category. So here are the results of our estimates of all these more than 9,000 foods. So the low category was mostly processed and heated foods. Not necessarily, they could have been fermented. The bread is a fermented food, the wine is fermented, the pepperoni is fermented, but these are all heat treated to inactivate microbes. The milk is pasteurized. The medium category is fresh fruits and vegetables and foods that may have contained a slice of cheese. Okay, so we assign those medium. And again, it's not until the high category that we see mainly fermented foods unheated. Okay, so these are the foods and the codes. How many of these foods are in each of these categories? So 96% of the of the foods in the NHANES catalog were in the low category. 3% were in the medium category, and only 1% are in the high category. Okay, and then if we look at what people are actually eating, only 20% of consumers eat foods from that high microbe category. Okay, we have data on how this breaks down to age groups. So NHANES has 5 age groups. I think it's 0 to 8, 8 to 18, 18 to 25, 25 to 51, and over 51. Teenagers do the worst, as you might expect. Most of the live microbes are coming from yogurt in particular, fermented foods, but yogurt in particular. Okay, and a third of consumers, based on NHANES, eat only low, or you could even consider them perhaps sterile microbe foods. So those are people living on highly processed foods, maybe fast foods and so forth, foods that are come out of the microwave. It's a lot of consumers. Okay, so how do we now relate the foods that contain microbes to health outcomes? So as part of NHANES, not only do they include the dietary surveys, but they also include interviews. They have a mobile physical exam operation and health assessments. Okay. And you can see all the health assessments. We a priori selected cardiovascular disease or cardiometric markers. So it wasn't a fishing expedition to see what correlates with where we got correlations. We chose at the outset cardiovascular disease. And then we had 2 biostatisticians to organize the statistics and conduct relevant regression analyses, again, to correlate consumption of live microfoods with physiological parameters. Okay. So let's jump to the chase and look at the results. So these are associations of foods containing dietary microbes per 100 grams of foods, and we combined the medium and the high microbe foods and looked at the cardiometric parameters, and we adjusted for a wide range of covariates. So this is controlled for age, sex, ethnicity, poverty income ratios, importantly, physical activity, smoking status, and alcohol intake. Now, among the positive outcomes, so we had improvement in blood pressure, CRP, glucose levels, cholesterol, insulin, triglyceride, waist circumference, weight, and BMI. When we use BMI as a covariate, we still see these same improvements in health. So it's not physical activity, it's not weight, it's actually real correlations with health status. Okay. If we look at just fermented foods, again, we see very similar significant p-values. I should go back. These are very significant p-values, highly significant, 0.9 to less than 0.01. We see very similar results when we just looked at these cardiometric parameters with fermented foods. Okay. So we published several papers. This is the main paper, the positive health outcomes, and in our conclusions we state this is the first study to quantify associations of dietary intakes of live microbes with a variety of outcomes. We suggest that foods with higher microbial concentrations are associated with modest health improvements across a range of cardiometric outcomes. So that was published in just a little over a year ago, and using the same NHANES database and the same criteria of low, medium, and high. We've seen just a flood of papers come out making similar associations for all sorts of other health outcomes. I just saw one this morning. I came across my desk on longevity. So I think there's clearly something there. Now, I want to just take a slight detour and talk about the only fermented food for which there is a health claim, a qualified health claim, um, and that is the yogurt health qualified health claim that came out earlier this year, um, where 3 servings of yogurt per week reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes. This is qualified. So they even you have to add, so if I haven't seen this yet on a yogurt container, but I believe it's coming out soon, you have to put that caveat according to limited scientific evidence. This was based not on randomized controlled trials. FDA disregarded those trials in the petition. It's based on observational epidemiological data, but I think real significant nonetheless. So, so the conclusions from these several studies that we've now conducted, we can answer the following questions. So which foods contain high levels of dietary microbes? It's mainly fermented foods, unheated fermented foods. I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. Who consumes these foods? Only about 20% of consumers. The evidence that supports the link between dietary microbes and health are these large cohort studies, but they do show multiple benefits. And then what confounding factors need to be considered? So I mentioned the covariates that we did control for, but there are other confounders. For example, we don't know about the overall eating patterns from the NHANES data. We don't know about foods that weren't consumed. And perhaps most importantly, we don't know which microbes from many of the food, in many of the cases, were in those foods. So the fruits and vegetables, those are coming with kind of commensal organisms that live on fruits and vegetables, whereas the fermented foods, we have a much better idea. Those are primarily going to be lactic acid bacteria that are there. So maybe we're not too far from the following, where we have the traditional my plate foods, but now we're suggesting adding a yogurt, a miso, a kefir, kimchi, a whole range of fermented foods. And I should point out that to achieve these benefits does not take a major shift in diet. As we report in the paper, you can achieve these levels of microbes that are significantly correlated with health benefits with just a daily serving of yogurt, a daily serving of just one fresh vegetable, a salad, and one fruit, an apple. So these are not hard to achieve. Which now brings me to the kind of the lead into the next talk, and that's this other challenge where we have to ask: is there a way for researchers or clinicians and other stakeholders to actually know what foods contain those live microbes? Yogurt's pretty easy, but when you get beyond the yogurt, what about other fermented foods are high in live microbes? So here's three examples of sauerkraut. This brand here claims to contain probiotics. It's basically unheated sauerkraut that has live microbes. This other jar of sauerkraut, I know this brand, and they used to contain live microbes, but now if you go to their website, they claim that it's now given a modest heat treatment for obvious reasons to extend shelf life, especially if cold chain can't be controlled. The microbes in sauerkraut are alive. They're only producing more acids, but they're producing gas, which can be a problem if cold chain isn't maintained. And of course, you have the canned sauerkraut. So maybe this one's pretty easy to say no live microbes. These other two, that's kind of tricky. So that's why I think this branded database that you're going to hear about in just a minute, I think has lots of value. So again, how do we know what microbes are there and how many? That's the question that's being addressed by this webinar. And even you can even dig deeper. What's the analytical method to come up with those numbers of live microbes, and perhaps even get to the point where we can establish what are the species in those microbes. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it back to Trish, and she'll introduce Kyle, our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hudkins, for setting the stage about the rationale for the importance of live dietary microbes and the ability to measure it in our food supply. So our next speaker will be Kyle McKillop. Kyle is the lead on USDA's FoodData Central, an integrated data system that provides expanded nutrient profile data and links to related agriculture and experimental research. He has a bachelor's degree in computer science and a master's in information management with a specialty in technology development and deployment. He previously worked for the University of Maryland's Joint Institute for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, where he worked on developing food database systems, including modernizing USDA's food composition database. Kyle is now with the USDA ARS Beltsville Human Nutrition Research Center to lead FoodData Central's data collection efforts and manage future application developments. He is an active participant of the public-private partnership that works to expand the global branded foods product database, which is published on FoodData Central. Welcome, Kyle.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Again, I'm Kyle McKillop. I am the lead on USDA's FoodData Central. And today I'm going to be giving a quick overview of the use of the Global Data Synchronization Network, or GDSN data, in the USDA Global Branded Food Products Database. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about branded foods, but I want to note that branded foods is just one of the 5 data types currently available on FoodData Central. FoodData Central is USDA's comprehensive source of food composition data with multiple distinct data types. It is a free, accessible database that you can find at fdc.nal.usda.gov. There are 5 data types on FoodData Central. Includes foundation foods, which includes analytical data and metadata on commodity and minimally processed food samples. Standard reference, which represents historical data collected over 35 years that includes analyses, calculations, and published literature. The food and nutrient database for dietary studies, which is a database application applied to analyze the foods and beverages that are reported in What We Eat in America's National Health and Nutrient Examination Survey, as you heard in the last presentation. And this work comes out of the Beltsville Human Nutrition Research Center. Experimental foods, that includes data from foods published in peer-reviewed journals in collaboration with USDA. And today we'll be talking about branded foods. First, I want to note that our latest release of FoodData Central was just 1 week ago on October 31st. And included with our October release was a quick overview video series that talks more about FoodData Central and includes videos that explore these data types further. I invite you to go to our site and watch these short videos to gain a better understanding of the data types that I will not be speaking about today. But back to branded foods. Branded foods is labeled data collected through a public-private partnership. So that public-private partnership for public health is the USDA Global Branded Food Products Database, which includes USDA, but also IAFNS, GS1 US, One World Sync, and the University of Maryland Joint Institute for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. The mission of the partnership is to improve public health and the sharing of open data by expanding and enhancing the USDA National Nutrient Database, that is USDA's FoodData Central, with nutrient composition and ingredient information on branded foods and private label data provided by the food industry. Why a public-private partnership? This ambitious project couldn't have been achieved by any single partner alone. Instead, these partners joined forces, each contributing their unique expertise. And the partners collaborated with a common purpose to create a robust, accessible, and reliable resource for consumers, researchers, and policymakers. If you go to FoodData Central and look at the branded foods data type, These are the fields that you'll immediately see. These are the ones that are required in order to submit into our database. A product name, nutrient values that are either per serving and or per 100 gram or per 100 milliliter servings, an ingredient list, a global trade identification number or UPC code, a brand owner, a product description, which might include other additional information on brand and sub-brand, food categories, a date stamp associated with current product formulation. Now there are 3 dates you'll see on the right for Food Data Central for a branded product. That's FDC or Food Data Central publish date, which is the day that USDA made that record available to our users. The available date is the manufacturer provided date that they made it available for the USDA to pull that data into our system. And the modified date, which is when the data provider last touched and modified that record. And we also include market country, of which the majority of products are sold and marketed in the United States. Those are just the required fields. Also, our live dietary microbe voluntary attributes, again, we'll be speaking about today and have been, but also caffeine statement, the not a significant source of statement, trade channel information, which is primarily used for child nutrition programs, 100 gram analytical data, meaning that manufacturers and data providers need not only to provide per serving, but they can provide per 100 gram accurate analytical data. And coming soon to branded foods, we would like to bring dual column data, which brings per serving and per container information directly to our users without having to do their own calculations, as well as the child nutrition material code that relates to the child nutrition programs. Before I get into what the microbe data looks like and data submission, I want to talk about the applications of the Global Branded Food Products database. This database is open to the wide users of Food Data Central that include the research community, policy officials, public health community, food industry, and consumers. The data in branded foods is used to assess ingredient use within product categories. We've seen it be used to establish links between diet and chronic disease. The data inform dietary tracking software and apps. With branded foods having over time monthly updates, you can look at a product's change since our launch in 2019 to understand how these products might change over time. And these data support federal programs and surveys used to inform food and nutrient assisted policy, like the What We Eat in America survey that we've discussed today. And talking about the use of branded foods in Food Data Central, to start with branded foods, we currently have over 450,000 food and beverage products in the database. That accounts for approximately 85% sales coverage of branded products. The data pipeline has been extended to support the K through 12 National School Lunch Program with the Food and Nutrition Service, as well as is currently being used for the Child Nutrition Database, which will be coming to Food Data Central later this year as monthly updates. For statistics on Food Data Central as a whole, which includes branded foods, we are the #1 highest used API traffic for USDA on data.gov. API is Application Program Interface, and those are for the app developers linking directly to our data set. Food Data Central over the past year has seen over 24 million page views that represent over 4 million users that include users from government, business, academia, and consumers, etc. So a call to action to this group is, are you currently submitting data to branded foods? And if not, why should you publish to branded foods? So first, talking about data integrity and control over data. Companies have greater control over their data by submitting via the Global Data Synchronization Network versus other ways researchers and database developers might amass data, like through website scanning, optical label recognition, or AI, all of which can introduce error into the data. There's global reach as branded foods reaches over 50% of our users, so almost 2 million users are coming from outside of the United States that use our data to inform information on branded products. Enhanced visibility, you can amplify brand reach and impact to ensure that your product lines are being represented accurately and the nutrition data is being represented with its most current formulation in USDA's Food Data Central. And it supports research. With the initiatives mentioned prior and the applications of the data, making sure that you're providing the most accurate data for these researchers to have the most knowledge in performing their research and having the highest quality data. So if you are not submitting data today, there are two ways that you can submit data through the Global Data Synchronization Network. You might be a One World Sync customer. One World Sync is one of our partners in the Branded Foods Partnership. But you do not need to be a One World Sync customer. You can be a data pool customer from another global data synchronization network. Either way, it may change on how you enter data into the system, but once the data are entered, you're going to select a recipient, the USDA Branded Foods Products database with the code and name listed. Now, a lot more detail on the requirements of data submission, as well as reiterating this GLN code for submitting data, is available at this link. And I put a QR code here so that you can quickly get over to that data. We'll also be providing some information at the end of the presentation with direct phone numbers and emails to contact One World Sync for more information, or if you're having issues submitting your data. So I've provided a screenshot here back to live microbes. This is in the One World Sync item management system, what it looks like. It might look different in your data pool provider. But this in One World Sync includes the organism code. You can see they have drop downs that auto-complete to ensure accurate entry of data with approved lists. And to show specifically what this would look like in Food Data Central is a screenshot here. So this is an example of how a voluntary attribute like live microbe data appears in the branded foods database. These data include the min and max amounts of live microbes that are found in the product, the method of analysis used to derive those counts. The three available are listed here, and the types of live microbes that can be found in the product, which are selected from a defined list which was provided by the IAFNS scientists in the Gut Health Committee. Very recently, not only organism but strain was added to this data model so that the strain can also be provided. This information in Food Data Central on the website application for a product would be found in the Other Information tab. It is also available via our downloads in its own file, microbe.csv. And to give you some context of the importance of this data, when brands share the data, share this data to the database, we can document in what foods live microbes are found and support estimates of how much live microbes people consume. These two pieces of information can support development of dietary guidance related to live microbe intake or claims for foods containing live microbes and health. And the biggest call of action here is for those on the line, are you currently submitting data to Food Data Central? Please check Food Data Central and ensure your product portfolio is represented, current, and accurate. You can check your products at Food Data Central at ftc.nal.usda.gov. Also check out our documentation, which includes more information about the branded food products database and quality checks that are performed on the data. And reach out to us if you have issues or would like more information about keeping your products up to date. So contact information here from both One World Sync customer support, as well as how to submit questions for Food Data Central. And as I understand today, we have representatives of the partnership from One World Sync and GS1 US who have also entered today to answer any questions you might have on submitting data into Branded Foods database.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kyle. Um, I'd like to invite the speakers as well as our other guests. Today we have not only our speakers, but also joining us will be Marshall Keener, Government Engagement Director from GS1 US, as well as Scott Brown, who is a Senior Director of Global Data Strategy at One World Sync, to turn on their webcams and to join for our Q&A. So we do have a number of questions coming in through our question box. So let's start with, well, a simple question maybe. Does sourdough bread contain live dietary microbes?
Well, thanks for that question. So I usually get a lot of these kinds of questions because people think of the fermented foods they consume, and naturally they want to think about what live microbes might be there. Um, so sourdough bread is one of those foods that are baked, and so the microbes are inactivated. But importantly for fermented foods, their health benefits extend beyond just the live microbes. So um, a good sourdough bread has other attributes that can contribute to positive health outcomes, but live microbes aren't one of those. Okay.
And
So
then
anything?
another question. So you've done some research that looked at associations between live dietary microbes. How will the specificity of the information that is available in the fields that Kyle showed help the research to move forward?
So if I understand the question is if that database was if we had a rich database, how would that advance the science? How would that advance the research? Okay. Um, so in our group and a lot of other groups that do that do dietary um, uh, consumption research, um, it's often based on recall information, but more and more we're using apps. So all they have to do is scan the food item. If it has a barcode, they could scan that, and it's much more reliable information than somebody trying to remember what they ate the day before. So again, I don't think the database is quite there yet, but at some point, if you could scan the cup of yogurt and that could somehow connect to the branded database, now that's a really very rich source of information that researchers and clinicians and other stakeholders could really take good advantage of. So not just so that they would know the brand of yogurt and what microbes were there. And I think then when you start to do your analyses of health outcomes, you could actually associate it with those specific microbes or the specific numbers of those microbes. That's one way I think that could work.
Okay. And Kyle mentioned that there's a number of different fields that were built in as voluntary attributes to the branded foods database, and that includes strain and species. Can you clarify which fields are required and which are optional with respect to live microbes if a company wanted to share their data, Kyle?
All right. So as of right now, it is the microbe species as well as the minimum value in colony forming units per gram is the minimum level of information that you have to provide to have your data be published in Food Data Central. Any additional fields as filled out will be added as supplemental and voluntary information. So if you're going to provide, you need to, at a minimum, provide the species and the minimum value.
Okay, and how would someone know if their company is already sharing other data with branded foods or through GDSN? Um, like that would be like step one. How would they know their company is already sharing data? And then who within their organization should they contact if they did want to promote sharing the microbe data?
So I'll speak to the first part, and our expert from a data pool provider can talk about the mechanism. But for searching through Food Data Central, there is a search interface. So in the search interface, you can put in the description of your product, your brand name, your company name. You can put in your global trade identification number into the search field on Food Data Central. Navigate to the branded foods database and see the number of results. So you can put in your products into the search and see if your data is currently in the system. For providing information forward is down to how you provide information through the global data synchronization network. And for that, I'll hand it over to Scott.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, so if you're using the network to get stuff into Food Data Central, you'll see it there, and you'll see that it's listed as the GDSN data. And from there, you're probably going to want to check back with whoever manages your products. Usually, a company will have a product team or a product master team, some folks like that. Those would be the ones that are typically loading information in. You can also check with your product department so far as who's doing the packaging. They may also know who inside your company is doing that. And in worst case scenario, you can always contact our customer support, and they can look you up and see if your company's in the network, and if so, where your contact point might be. So you can reach out through any one of us here on the phone call, Marshall, Trish, myself, or Kyle, and we can help you find that out if you need to know that.
Thank you. And I think this question is for Dr. Hutkins. How do you verify the presence of live microbes in a product? And if companies share this information voluntarily with branded foods, do you just take the word of the producer? And does the amount of live microbes impact the relationship to health outcomes?
Yeah.
There's a lot in there.
Yeah, it's really, and that's a really important question. So for the most part, microbiologists still rely on the tried and true plate count method for enumerating live microbes, and that's probably the easiest way to do it. There are other ways of doing that as well, but let's just say it's a plate count method. On the database, and Kyle could speak to this as well. There's a place to include the method that was used, and that could be simply the growth medium that's in the petri dish that's used. If you use a more sophisticated technique, I'm not sure that the database would allow for a PCR-based method, or not sure on that. But it does include a method or how that was done. I forgot, was there another part to the question at the end?
And does the amount of live dietary microbes have a relationship to the health outcome?
Yeah. So the regression analysis said yes, that the greater, the more that you eat per 100 grams of foods, the higher the better the statistics were.
Okay, Kyle, just for clarification, when the information is entered by manufacturers on their product, they can select the method that how the determination was made, correct?
That's correct. Yes, there are three options. It's aerobic plate count, flow cytometry, or other.
Okay. And if they select other, is there any way for them to provide additional information about what that other method is?
I don't believe so at this time, but I'm actually going to hand that over to Scott because he can validate my claim here.
So Trish, can you repeat that again? I apologize. I got a quick blip there because of where I'm at.
The drop down for the method, has two methods and then an other field. The question was, if a manufacturer selects other, is there a place for them to put any additional information about their measurement type?
No. So it's either going to be one of those two. The other is if one's not listed. If you do have a different method, reach out to our customer support and we can evaluate whether we need to put in another code into that setup.
And with
if I could just add, I think part of that question was, are we relying on the manufacturer to put that number in there, and is that reliable? I think at this point that is the case. There are laboratories that are that can certify those numbers. I've even seen a brand of a fermented food that claimed to have the number certified by I assume a reputable third-party lab.
Okay.
Yeah, so all of the information that you would see coming through GDSN is supplier provided or manufacturer provided. And so it's up to them to keep their data current and clean, because at the end of the day, they're the ones responsible for the data.
Thank you. And a question came in, would there be a benefit to just understanding if live microbes are present, even if you don't know the types or the amounts? So is there any way for a manufacturer just to share that their product contains live dietary microbes without providing this additional information?
Well, that in fact is how how you see a lot of products already on the market, whether it's in the cultured milk and plant milk category, whether it's the fermented vegetables, misos, kimchis, and so forth. Many of those brands will say raw, not pasteurized, contains live microbes. Um, Fairly generic. You'll see numbers mainly on again from the cultured milk and plant milk products where they'll actually say more than 10 million or whatever it happens to be. But there would be some value if they just said live microbes, but certainly having some enumeration data to go with it, I think it would be much more helpful.
And is there ongoing microbial growth in packaged foods in a product over time?
There will be some growth and there will be some death. And so it's just like other nutrients, vitamins and so forth. Whatever's on the label is at manufacture or through shelf life. So usually for dairy products, shelf life's only a month or so for a yogurt, so that's pretty easy if they know what was in there at manufacture, that they'll probably be retained. But some products might go longer and they could die off.
And I'm not sure if we have the right person to answer this question. How can you produce a CFU result with flow cytometry?
So flow cytometry will detect and enumerate live and dead. So they don't call them CFUs. They'll call them, they'll use different units. And flow cytometry is becoming much more acceptable as a measure of microbial content. But it's not CFUs.
Okay. And for Kyle, I'll let you, I see your hand is raised, so you have something to share anyway. But there's also a question, is it possible to view live dietary microbe information in branded foods right now and search the database for foods that contain that information?
Sure. Let me start with some of the previous questions. I wanted to add some additional context. Branded Foods does not currently pull in any sort of label claims on products. We're focused on the nutrient facts panel and ingredient list, but we do have that ingredient list. And so that is potentially a place where sometimes these live microbes are advertised as well in the ingredient list, and you can discover them through there. The next point on the units of measure, the colony forming units per gram is not the only unit of measure that you can provide. There is a select list when you choose your value to choose a different unit of measure in the system. And on the last point, yes, we right now had Yakult pilot providing information over. So if you search for Yakult's products, you'll find the 2 products where they've entered the live microbe data. And you can go to their products, go to the more information tab, and see their data there. And as we have more data coming in, especially with this new extension of including the strain information, we'll be updating that display and updating that data model to include any new data that's being submitted. Again, it also can be found in the download file. So if you download our CSV files, we have a table specifically for the microbe data that's been submitted through Branded Foods.
Thank you. Another question, in Dr. Hutkin's examples, he showed a sauerkraut product that was labeled as probiotic, but unless the live microbes contained within that product were characterized and quantified and shown to provide a health benefit at those levels, it doesn't truly meet the ISAP definition of a probiotic, correct?
Absolutely correct. And so I use that as a nice example because it is a fermented food with live microbes. But I totally agree with the question that it cannot be considered probiotic. But the term probiotic gets used rather loosely in many of these kinds of foods. But the question is 100% correct.
Is there not an FDA definition or approved claim for the use of the word probiotic on a label?
There is not. And in Europe, the EFSA doesn't even allow you to use the word probiotic because in the definition is a health benefit. EFSA has, for the most part, there might be an exception or two. It has not approved a claim for any probiotic.
So that may not be a useful term for determining foods with meaningful amounts of live dietary microbes.
So the ISAP physicians, they would prefer to use live dietary microbes, contains live dietary microbes, rather than to use the word probiotic.
Okay, another question here. How does one use the sell by versus best by dates for products that contain live microbes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So again, it's the manufacturers probably are doing those analyses, maybe, but the large companies that are selling yogurt, they probably do know what live microbes are left at the end of shelf life, but it's not routinely done, especially for the non-dairy products like the sauerkrauts and kimchis and pickles and misos. They probably aren't even doing plate counts at all. Whether regardless of for shelf life purposes or used by dates, they probably just aren't doing that.
But it sounds like there is a benefit for the companies that have measurable data on live microbes for their products to share that information as a point of differentiation to other products in the marketplace.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of incentive, as Kyle talked about. I think there's lots of incentive for manufacturers to do that. Especially, I give a lot of talks on fermented foods and the benefits of fermented foods, and the category is growing, and I think for many companies to establish themselves in that category, being able to document that their foods contain live microbes and whatever level, I think is a value.
A couple more questions here. I think we have time for one or two more. Can live microbes survive freezing?
For the most part, they can, yes. Depends on the freezing rate, the temperature, but for the most part, they do okay in the cold.
And then the amount of microbes that would be entered in on the products in this database, that would refer to the amount of microbes when the product leaves the factory. Do companies consider shelf life loss? Do they take that into consideration when they do these measurements? Or are they sharing the live microbe content that's expected at the end of shelf life?
Yeah. Is that for you, Kyle, or for me?
I mean, it's not a regulatory field. It's a voluntary information that companies can share. So, do you have an opinion on how
Well,
companies should have?
ideally, it would be the live microbes at end of shelf life. Um, but again, it's a big ask for companies to do the live microbes at manufacture, and to expect them to do that end of shelf life. It's it might, I don't know, it might be a big ask, or it's an ask.
And right now, there's not, I guess, Kyle, this is for you. There's not currently a field in branded foods in the live microbe set that would allow them to identify what this measurement represents at product launch or at end of shelf life.
Not yet. A few things is just a reminder, this is a voluntary data set. We're asking manufacturers and data providers to provide this data over and have determined data models that will try to make that barrier of entry as easy as possible to provide that data over to begin. But the best thing about the partnership is identifying those gaps of information and adding in new fields over time that might better articulate what the data mean. And so feedback is important for us to understand, hey, this might be a field. We go back with GS1 and One World Sync to discuss, hey, we think this would be a value to add, and can we work on adding this to a future update model? That's how we got to adding the strain information, when it was recognized that that information was available and information that could be provided over.
Thank you very much. So I think that's all the time we have for questions. I do want to thank our speakers and for our guests, Marshall and Scott, for joining us today. I would like to remind everyone on the call that you can reach out to any of the contacts Kyle provided or to me directly, and I can forward your question. If you have more questions about either how to share live dietary microbes with branded foods, or how your company can begin to share data with the Global Branded Foods Product Database. Before we sign off for the day, I did want to remind everyone that IAFNS has a Science Innovation Showcase that will be hosted between December 10th and 12th, and we invite you to join us for that. And then just a reminder of my contact information should you have any additional questions, you can reach out to me. So again, thank you to all the speakers. Excellent presentation, and I look forward to working with you all again. Take care.
Thank you.